so we're going to take this spreadsheet that we just had the previous video on, that you can go back and look at where we're analyzing the data in Excel. And now we're going to take this information and we're going to analyze it in Copilot. So I'm going to open up Copilot. So you get this window, and notice that I'm on the Work tab. The difference being that Work is looking at my internal information, Web would be looking potentially at external information or pulling in external information, and Enterprise Chat is turned on. So this is telling me that I'm using a system that's part of my enterprise, approved by my IT department, that keeps my data. It doesn't share it, it doesn't train the model, the data doesn't go anywhere or leave my control, right? Which is important, especially when you're talking about data that's sensitive. So I want to add some content, and I'm going to go find that file if it doesn't just pop up here. There it is. All right, so now I have my spreadsheet in there, and now I just want Copilot to do some analysis. So I'm going to ask it to tell me a couple of things.
And why is this valuable now is what we were talking about before. I don't know what other is. I don't know what our issues are, and I need to kind of drill down, and maybe I have a request from city council, and maybe I have a request from a citizen advocacy group that's saying, hey, your officers are doing X or Y. And so I'm trying to figure out what it is, why people are saying they don't like the police, or they don't like the police department, or why we're leaving a bad taste in people's mouths. So we're trying to find out what this other is. It's not use of force. It's not some of the glaring issues that we've been looking at. So now we want to look at it and get this analysis. And so we've taken that spreadsheet. Now we've thrown it into Copilot. We're asking it to analyze it for us so we can take a look at it. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so this prompt that I wrote says, analyze this spreadsheet with all my data in there, and tell me which officers have a pattern of complaints that indicate a need for intervention, right? So I'm trying to kind of tease out of the information, even though when we looked at previously, we saw that there was a lot of officers with multiple complaints. It's able to dive in and say, hey, this person has 29 and multiple instances of aggressive language and unnecessary use of force and racial profiling. So it's pulling out those categories or numbers of complaints that seem to be a pointer in the direction that you probably ought to intervene, right? That there's likely a possibility that this handful of officers here are doing something systemically wrong in the way that they approach people that they deal with in the public, right? So then, Chief, if you want to comment on that, that'll be great. I'm going to write a second one to look at more broadly systemic issues that are across the department.
Well, and why is this valuable? Because maybe I have an officer that has poly violations, right? We have use of force, we have being rude, we have these other issues. Also, is this my FTO? Is this a certain key sergeant? Is this my training sergeant? Like, these are some of the things that smaller agencies, especially where you have one staff member wearing multiple hats, can all of a sudden have a lot of large influence in the department. And so now we can really start to see where this is and what the issue is. And it's true that you get a recency bias when you start looking at the recent complaints and the recent data. And as it goes over the course of the year, you start to forget about some of the other issues. So this is a great way to actually go back, be refreshed, and make sure that we're looking at our systemic problem and addressing. Maybe we're going to do training. Maybe we're going to do a reassignment of a couple of people. This isn't just about this person was disciplined because this person had such an egregious act, but it is now looking at it going, okay, this is our training, FTO that is training all of our new staff. And ironically, two of these people are new recruits that were his trainees. Maybe that's the case, or maybe it's something else, but all of this gives us an insight to look at it. Okay, Dave, next spot.
Yeah, so great. Thanks, Chief. So I just wrote, what about a pattern across the data that would indicate that I have a force-wide training issue or an area where policy needs to be reinforced, right? So I'm not looking at an individual, but I'm saying, where do I as an organization maybe need to just get an azimuth check and get everybody back on track? And you'll notice it's nothing about people. it just pulls out that they're across these 6 areas, and it provides some suggestions for where you may have problems and you need to kind of reinforce those parts of your policy and processes and professional standards. And a couple of things to note is I didn't have to reload the data, right? Because I'm in this continuous chat, it knows that I'm referencing this. Notice I didn't talk about the spreadsheet. I didn't identify it. I just said across the data and asked my question. So it's a really easy way to continue to have that kind of rolling conversation. And when you use it in this particular mode of Copilot, it captures each one of these. So if I forget what I asked or I accidentally close it out and go off to do something else, I can come back and rerun it, and it will recalculate all the data that I've entered from the prompts already and bring it back up. And then there's this new feature called Edit in Pages, where I could put this into a page. This basically is Loop, is what the product is called. And you easily can copy this out into Word. Notice it puts in a link to the document as well. But now I can share this. So if I was an analyst or a person that was responsible for reviewing this particular type of data, or I was the chief and I was doing it and I wanted to send this information over to my training officer and say, hey, we've got a problem and I'd like you to come up with a plan to reinforce these 6 areas, in your training sessions over the next month or so. Here's a document. You can send it out to them. You don't need to copy paste and do a bunch of extra work, and you guys can iterate over this and develop a plan around it.
And
So
the
I
other
hope this
part,
is
sorry.
helpful.
Well,
Yeah,
and
go
the other
ahead.
part of that, Dave, is let's say you're the lieutenant that's compiling this for the chief or a sergeant or whatever, a captain, whoever it is. And suddenly the chief comes back and says, but I want to know about X, Y, and Z. And you're like, okay, I'll work on that. You can come back, pull this up, and ask more questions that they just asked you. And then, use common sense too, but cross it with what they're asking you. And now you're not having to go, oh my God, now I got to redo this whole thing. You can just build on what you've already done. And it's like having that additional conversation. And we all know that sometimes we'll meet with somebody, they'll say, but that's not what I asked. I wanted X, Y, and Z. Okay, go back now, and you have a reference point to go back and get that information. So I think this is really huge. This is very
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, and the other thing is because sometimes you get stuck on what question do I ask. Copilot's really good about understanding the data, and you'll see here I'm kind of highlighting them. So summary of the most frequent complaint types, which officers have the highest number of complaints by category, can you identify trends over time in the complaint data? So it provides you some prompts that are already pre-written. So if you get stuck, you can come up with it. And over time, you'll get better and better at writing prompts to get the kind of answers back that you're looking for, because specificity matters. If you ask something really broad, as you saw in our previous video around Excel, it may misinterpret what you're trying to get, and you're not quite getting those right results back. Just like what Chief was just saying, where maybe you hear the question, you go and ask the data, you come back to find out that's not exactly what was meant by the question. So your chances to iterate over it very quickly, and Copilot helps you do that much faster. So let's look at this. Let's just click on one of these and say identify trends over time, and it puts it in. You could edit that if you needed to, and we'll just take a quick look at it and see what it tells us about trends over time.
And we're going to do more videos on command prompts to help with that. So just, bear with us, and we're trying to get out more to give you little steps as this goes and make life easier.
So it actually drew us out a graph and said, these are your trends over time. Looks like you had a lot in January. February was a great month, and then we're trending back upwards in March. So again, interesting. It actually generates a chart for us that you could grab that and drop it right into a briefing or share it in a edit page in Pages, which is again Loop. So with that, I'm going to stop.